So welcome everyone. Thank you for attending Vermont AEYC session called Getting Up to Speed, where we're going to be talking about the advancing as a profession work, where we're at, what's been happening over the last few years. This session is a combination of my sharing information as well as using some of our videos that Katie Titterton has put together for us. They're amazing, and she does such a great way of sharing complex information with some really great visuals. So I think it's a nice tie-in. The other thing that's really important as we get started to think about with this session is we're actually talking about building two systems. So you have to kind of hold that while we're talking through this information. So those two systems are one for our existing workforce to get across a bridge to the future, and the other is a system for the future workforce. And so we're looking at building this system out into the future for folks who haven't even decided they wanted to work in the early childhood field as of yet. They might be still in high school, or they might be in a totally different career and they haven't realized, hey, I think I want to be an early childhood educator. So we're building that, but we also want to hold so carefully our current workforce and make sure we don't lose anyone and help them get across that bridge to the future. So I'm going to go ahead and get our slides up on the screen. Just a little bit of background information here. NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, began looking at the concept of advancing the early childhood system as a fully recognized profession quite a few years ago. And their project is known as Power to the Profession. And so we'll talk a little bit here and there about the Power to the Profession work. And we're also going to look at what Vermont is doing. So Vermont's advancing as a profession work is held by the Vermont affiliate known as Vermont AEYC, the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. So as I mentioned, NAEYC began doing work with their project called Power to the Profession, and they put together a document called the Unifying Framework. You can see over on the right-hand side. This document really holds the guidance and recommendations for building a nationally cohesive profession that is reciprocal across state lines. So we're going to talk about what has been studied, what are these recommendations, things around professional identity, 3 designations, which are the roles early educators hold. It's also preparation for those roles, and compensation, everyone's favorite topic. The first thing I want to do is get us started with a video that gives us a little bit of the history around what we're talking about with advancing as a profession. And you'll notice that this video was put together about 2 years ago, right at the onset of the pandemic, but it's really still relevant other than some of the pieces we'll see relating to hourly wages. So I'm going to go ahead and get that played.
Across the country and throughout the state of Vermont, the early childhood education system has reached a crisis point. There are not enough openings in high-quality programs to meet the number of children who need care. And high-quality programs cost a lot to operate. As a result, the tuition per child can amount to thousands of dollars annually. Even so, childcare providers, on average, make very little. Providers can't afford to make less, and families can't afford to pay more. In addition, childcare access magnifies inequality. The poorest families are the least likely to be able to get their children into high-quality programs. The current reality is a system that is fragmented, inconsistent, and under-resourced. Over the past year, Vermont AEYC has begun building the conversation and momentum toward a different future, a cohesive, high-quality, appropriately resourced early childhood education system for all of Vermont's young children and their families. Then another kind of crisis hit Vermont, the coronavirus COVID-19. To reduce the spread of the virus, Governor Phil Scott's administration ordered early childhood education programs throughout the state to close, along with public schools and non-essential businesses. This affects about 1,200 early childhood educators. Families must manage their children's care and learning during the workday, often while continuing to work remotely. and those parents who are designated essential workers risk putting their own safety on the line each day. The state gave early childhood education programs the choice to reopen to serve the children of essential workers. Those providers who are offering care are acting out of a sense of civic duty.
And I'm staying open currently for essential families. This is an important time for them to be able to go to work and know that their children are safely being cared for, and that way they can concentrate on all the work they're doing.
So we're thankful that Susie stayed open through this, because my wife and I are considered essential employees. It's been able to give us a chance to go back out and help the community that we live in to keep going and keep everyone safe.
Meanwhile, educators at temporarily closed programs continue to offer their families and children support, ideas, and resources for their time at home together.
Let me know what you found outside that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before, that could be made into art or just used to inspire and excite you about making things.
Early childhood educators are rising to the occasion by supporting Vermont's essential workers and families now staying home with their young children. They are also demonstrating that quality care for Vermont children is itself essential. Recognizing that, the state of Vermont moved to put together the strongest child care stabilization program in the country. Because once this health crisis is over, workers will need access to child care in order to restart our economy. Meanwhile, advocacy groups are working together to communicate the needs of providers and families to policymakers, to organize emergency funding, to support logistics within a rapidly changing system, and to communicate among stakeholders.
What do you hear? I hear a hippopotamus snorting in my ear.
Everyone with a stake in early childhood, families, providers, industry organizations, nonprofit groups, funders, and government recognizes the COVID-19 crisis is dangerous to health and safety, damaging to our economy, and leaves parents scrambling to provide quality care for their kids. But when we can all see the same need, perhaps we can collaborate better to fill it. This is a time when our society is redefining what it means to be essential. There is new respect for those occupations and professions that are necessary for the public good.
We are staying open for the people who still have to go to work to make things run, such as grocery workers, gas station employees, and especially the hospital employees on the front line.
Also essential are early childhood educators. In a crisis, stakeholder groups learn quickly that they need to support each other or collapse, and the collapse of one system leads to the collapse of another. But that's not what's happening here in Vermont. These days, the spirit of collaboration among state government and agencies, nonprofits, philanthropists, educators, and families gives us renewed purpose. Throughout this crisis and beyond, we must build on this spirit of collaboration, duty, and mutual respect to create a new future for early childhood education as a shared public good that we all support. And across the country.
Oops. Well, if you've taken a session with me before, you know that my technology skills sometimes lack when it's transitioned from a video. But every time I do watch that video, I'm just struck by the realization that the general public and policymakers had that if early childhood educators do not go to work, the economy does not work. And we have to remember that is a bright spot that came out of COVID, that it really shined a light on the fact that early childhood education is critical not only for the well-being of the children and the consistency and stability and access to education opportunities, relationship building, but it ensures that the families of these children are able to go to work. The other thing that jumps out at me is simply the fact that this critical group of people, as we know, are often paid minimum wage and not valued. And that is a real hardship, that the people carrying forth so much of the foundational work in our country are not valued with reasonable wages. I did a session about a month ago, and somebody said to me in the session, she said, I have education, I have credentials, I take trainings, and when I drive to work every morning, I go by the bagel shop and they're advertising that they pay higher. And that person doesn't need to have any qualifications to start working at the bagel shop. So that comes through really, really loud and clear. And we know we're still dealing with workforce shortage, and we're still, trying to get out of this pandemic, but still these issues are here and they're real, and we really need to continue focusing on them. So when we think about this project, Vermont AEYC's, where are we now? We've got these different phases, but what you don't see on here is predating 2018 down at the bottom. In 2017, Vermont AEYC said, okay, let's bring together about 250 folks and have a conversation. NACE, with their power to the profession on the national level, is doing some work. Do we want to keep an eye on this? Those 250 folks said, yes, absolutely. We need to keep an eye on what's going on. So in 2018, we decided we've got to go out to the workforce and we've got to ask them, what's your will to engage? This project is workforce driven. So it's you all working in direct care with children every day in classrooms, family childcare homes, in the settings of where kids are taken care of and given opportunities to thrive. So we had 58 conversations around the state, 58 driving all over the state. And that's pre-pandemic, everything's in person, getting to talk to folks, getting to step into programs or network meetings or staff meetings, all sorts of great things. Well, what we heard from those 58 conversations was 96% said, this system is not working, we need a change. And you'll see those numbers below. 72% said, we're all in, we need to move forward as a profession. This doesn't work. 24% said, well, let's make some changes. Only 4% said, let's do nothing. So when 96% of the people that we talked to in 58 conversations said, make a change, that's where this project was really born out of, is continuing to watch what was happening on the national level and continuing to bring information out to the workforce. So here we are moving up the steps there, phase 2. That's when the Unifying Framework came out. That was a document I showed you in the beginning that really has like the guidance, I'll say, to how to build a nationally cohesive profession. And we started chunking it out and pulling pieces out and going out and having conversations with the workforce. We talked about professional identity. We talked about the 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways. We talked about professional compensation. And we're still talking about what are the necessary supports and resources the existing workforce is going to need to get across that bridge. Well, now we're up at the top in phase 3, and that's where we've collected so many recommendations from the workforce. We've discussed and researched and reviewed different aspects, and we're now bringing forth those recommendations to our partners, our state government partners, the agencies, higher education, and saying, this is what we're hearing from the workforces. This is what they're saying they need in order to be successful. So the next video I want to show you, it really talks about our process. It talks about our task force, which you'll learn is made up of a diverse group of early educators here in Vermont that span different settings, different roles, and different areas geographically in our small state.
Advancing early childhood education as a recognized profession in Vermont. First of all, what is a profession? According to research by early childhood education leader and author Stacy Goffin, a profession has 1. A well-defined, distinct purpose, 2. Specialized knowledge and skills, and 3. Systems and structures for preparation, accountable practice, and field-wide leadership. You may already consider yourself a professional. You may be excellent at what you do. But early childhood education is a fragmented field. Advancing as a recognized profession leads to clarity and cohesion in the field, community understanding and respect, better preparation for public and private investment, and opportunity for better compensation. Advancing as a profession takes time. Here in Vermont, we've been building toward this for years. In 2018 and 2019, the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children, or Vermont AEYC, launched Chapter 1 of a workforce engagement project asking early childhood educators across the state, what is the will to advance as a recognized profession? Overwhelming support prompted Vermont AEYC to continue the work. Vermont AEYC is now in Chapter 2 of our workforce-led initiative to advance early childhood education as a recognized profession. We are building on what we learned in Chapter 1. That includes our workforce motto for this project: do nothing about us without us. With that in mind, this project is structured to be led by a diverse representation of the workforce and inclusive of all voices within the workforce. Vermont's initiative is structured to be workforce-led. A task force is made up of members who represent the roles, settings, and regions of Vermont's early childhood education workforce. The task force leads the effort to discuss recommendations and writes discussion drafts to present to the workforce for feedback. Regional facilitators hold conversations throughout the state to gather members of the workforce in groups to talk about the task force's recommendations. Members of the early childhood education workforce read the task force's discussion drafts, host and attend regional conversations, and complete surveys as we go through each step. The ongoing participation of the workforce is critical to the accuracy and success of this project. A resource team of funders, leaders of stakeholder agencies, organizations and networks, and consultants makes sure the initiative to advance has the funding it needs to succeed and is reaching all possible stakeholders. Vermont AEYC is an affiliate of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC. At the national level, NAEYC's Power to the Profession initiative is a national collaboration to define the early childhood profession by establishing a unifying framework for career pathways, knowledge and competencies, qualifications, standards, and compensation. So, we start with the Power to the Profession framework. The goal of Vermont's task force is to answer, to what extent might Vermont's early childhood education workforce choose to align with this national framework? The task force studies each piece of the framework. After deliberation, they create a discussion draft to present to the Vermont workforce. The workforce discusses the draft in facilitated regional conversations and offers feedback through surveys. The task force incorporates this workforce feedback into a consensus document and begins with the next piece of the framework. As a state affiliate of NAEYC, Vermont AEYC's initiative can provide valuable feedback to national leaders while taking steps to eliminate fragmentation, increase cohesion, and advance early childhood education as a recognized profession in Vermont.
I think that video is so powerful. It gives us just a great glimpse into how the task force works and what's happening behind the scenes with this project. So before we go forward, I just want to really reiterate that this is workforce driven. And so that means when we're having these sessions, talking with you all, collecting information, you really are in the driver's seat. You really are shaping the responses of what's happening and what's going forward with the different areas that are being discussed. So let's move forward and talk about the very first area we discussed, which was identity. So we all know out there that terminology used for early childhood educators can vary. And this article came out in 2020. And I'm sure that the second bullet down there, just like me, probably is like nails on a chalkboard for you to hear the term babysitter. You know, we all know that early childhood educators are doing much more than babysitting or being nannies or any of those other types of terms. But it can be really confusing and convoluted. And then we look at this next slide here, and just in Vermont alone, between the Child Development Division and the Agency of Education, we have a ton of names. We all know what these mean. I'm sure they look very familiar to you. A teacher assistant, teacher associate, family child care provider, substitute, floater, director. We know exactly what all of that means. But our policymakers and our general public do not. It's actually very confusing to them. And the story I love to share with everybody, which I think really hits home, is former executive director of Vermont AEYC, Sonia Raymond, was testifying in Montpelier. And she was talking about the importance of early childhood education. And after she was speaking for about 5 minutes, they stopped her. They said, hold up, we need you to stop. And of course, Sonia's taken aback, thinking, well, why do you need me to stop? And they said to her, we don't know who you are or what you do. And Sonia could not for life figure out what this meant. What do you mean? I've been talking to you for 5 minutes. How can you not know who I am or what I do? So they said to her, well, since you started talking, you referred to yourself in 6 different ways. And it's so true. We do that because we know what every single one of those bullets on that list means. We know teacher, owner, director, licensed home, licensed center, floater. We know what all that means. Provider is a term we use all the time. But to policymakers, the general public, the term provider actually means somebody in the medical community. And so when we decided, okay, what's the very first piece we're going to take out of the unifying framework to discuss, we thought it had to be professional identity. We have to get to a point where we use a name to identify ourselves that can explain to the general public, policymakers, what on earth do we do? So the names proposed were early childhood educator in the early childhood education profession. And as you see up in that top left, it says 90%. So when we brought out numerous conversations to the workforce, to all of you, some of you may even have been there. This was pre-pandemic again. So driving around in our cars all over the state, talking to folks saying, hey, what do you think of this name? 90% said, I really like that name. I really like the term early childhood educator. The other thing we had to figure out is who on earth fits in the profession and who is in the field. So one of the things I like to do is I like to connect this to the medical field. It helps make it a little bit more tangible and realistic, because professionalizing the early childhood field, it's a concept. We've got to get used to it and wrap our heads around what it means. So if we think of the medical field, nurses are part of the nursing profession. They're in direct care. They're taking care of patients, but they can't do their job without the lab technicians. Now, the lab technicians are testing blood or different types of samples, things like that, identifying any type of abnormalities or issues, making sure the nurses and the doctors have that information so the proper care and medication can be given to the patient. So the nurses are in the profession, but the lab techs are not. So if we then draw a line over to think about that in conjunction with early childhood, those working in the classroom would be in the profession. And the folks in the field might be pediatricians, they might be librarians, they might be home visitors, they might be special education clinicians. They're not direct care all day long, but they certainly help stand up the early childhood system, and they help make sure that the care for young children and education is high quality. So the next thing we talked about was this distinct role piece. Now, this is an opportunity where I had a really great perspective to see both sides of it. So the task force reviews the information in the unifying framework, and they look at it and they try to figure out, okay, does this work for Vermont? We're going to put this forth to the workforce. We're going to ask their opinions. 98% said, yes, we really like this. We do promote the learning development of children birth through age 8. We recognize this is foundational for learning, and it's built through reciprocal relationships. We know relationships require the attention to children and families. And there's a lot of influences on child development. So 98% said yes, absolutely. Then we got to this piece of responsibilities. Again, 98%. Now this is where it was kind of interesting. And so the task force felt strongly. They liked these 9 items, but they really wanted to add to it. They said they felt there should be a piece added around provider disposition. And they also felt like there should be a piece added around play. Well, when we brought this out to the workforce actually loved everything that was written, but they said there's 2 things we don't really like that much. We don't like disposition being in there, and we don't want to make it feel limited to just play. We want it to be inclusive of all types of programs. So the workforce said, take those 2 pieces out. So I had the viewpoint of seeing the task force really insisted that be put in. And then I had the viewpoint of seeing the workforce say, nope, take it out. So when the task force received all the feedback from the workforce, I was really interested to see, well, what's going to happen here? Absolutely, without question, they honored the feedback from the workforce and they took those pieces right back out. And so it was a really great opportunity for me to see the system as we were working in it and seeing how the task force really does make sure this is workforce driven. It is all of you, as I've said before, right in that driver's seat. So the next thing we brought out to the workforce was a conversation around 3 designations. Now, if my colleague Kim Freeman was here, she'd be joking, it's 3 destinations. Nope, it's definitely 3 designations. And designations is kind of a weird word. So if you think about it as roles, what are the roles the early childhood educators will have? And again, linking it to the medical field really helps with nurses. If you think about that LNA, LPN, and RN, those are 3 different roles in the medical field that those nurses hold. They come with specific preparation, skills, job responsibilities. So that's what this particular piece of the Unifying Framework talks about, is those designations. Now I am going to advance this video over to the 7-minute mark. So bear with me. I don't want to make you dizzy while I quickly fast forward through this. If I was better, I'd get this loaded up and started. So it was right at the right cue. Here we go.
So, using the framework from Power to the Profession, we have been building our professional identity. With workforce input, consensus is growing around 2 key parts of our identity. Who we are. We are early childhood educators. What we do. We have distinct roles and specialized responsibilities in working with young children and families. This graphic shows 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways, and this is what we really want to hear your thoughts about. There's a lot here, so let me unpack it for you so you will feel ready to respond to the survey. There are 3 distinct designations for early childhood educators: ECE 1, ECE 2, and ECE 3. For each designation, there is a preparation pathway to build the needed competencies. For ECE 1, 120 clock hours and an organized ECE program. For ECE 2, an associate's degree. For ECE 3, a bachelor's degree, or an initial master's degree for someone who got their bachelor's degree in another field. These pathways are designed to make it easy to move from one to the next without having to backtrack or start over. These professionals will be prepared to work as part of a teaching team with unique roles and responsibilities. ECE 1 can play a support role. ECE 2 can play a lead role in birth through age 5 with guidance from an ECE 3. Of course, Vermont Universal Pre-K programs would still require a licensed preschool teacher. ECE 3 is qualified to play a lead role in birth through age 8 and to guide the practice of others. So you can see that the idea is for these 3 designations to work as a team, and the future structure would be set up to support just that. Compensation and responsibilities increase as individuals increase the depth and scope of their expertise, regardless of the setting of their job. Compensation is a critical piece. The task force is studying Power to the Profession recommendations for compensation. So look for information on that and your chance to weigh in the spring of 2021.
So quite often when we're presenting these professional development sessions, we hear a lot of the same questions. And I want to take a minute to just address a few of those. One of the questions I often hear is, am I included? Yes, you absolutely are included if you want to be. Power to the Profession is committed to building a bridge to the future that embraces the future workforce and honors the existing workforce. So those who choose to meet those qualifications will have the support to do so. There may be some who choose not to meet those qualifications, and that's completely okay. Those individuals will just not be members of the early childhood profession. That's completely their choice. They can still work with young children and their families, but they just won't be part of the profession. What is envisioned here is that there'll be more benefits and incentives to be in the profession of the early childhood education, and people will want to be part of it.
What's in it for me? It's pretty natural for this to feel scary and to wonder about how it will impact us. So I focus on taking the 30,000-foot view. Let's think about what this can do for us as a field and for children and for families as we move into the future. How it gets us unstuck from where we are now. Some answers to what's in it for me include respect and recognition, feeling valued, professional compensation that includes benefits, and a clear pathway to advance to the next designation.
We also often hear the question of, could I really do it? It can seem really overwhelming when you think about everything all at once, but yes, you absolutely can do this. Built into this is a commitment to ensuring that the supports are there for you to pursue the preparation pathways you choose. This means breaking down those barriers to higher education, like the cost and availability. It also means creating innovative models that make accessing education easier, but still maintaining a commitment to quality. The whole thing cannot and will not be done on the backs of the workforce. Instead, federal and state government agencies will need to be involved, as well as increased public financing.
How would it even work? One answer to that is it will mean engaging all parts of the early childhood education ecosystem: educators, owners, directors, preparation programs, state and federal government, and agencies. This is a national effort. It's not something Vermont has to do all on its own. Power to the Profession has made commitments to advocate for what is needed to really make this work, including the funding for necessary supports and increased compensation.
So when would this happen? Well, we're talking about a phased-in implementation. This is not going to happen next year. It has to happen over time. Empower to the Profession advocates for realistic implementation timelines that recognize the challenges faced by the existing workforce, and plans and timelines that recognize the particular challenges of family child care providers and other community-based programs. We know these programs are in widespread decline, and implementation has to be done thoughtfully to make sure that problem doesn't get worse. So getting from where we are today to where we want to go will require a bridge that embraces our future workforce and honors the existing one. This includes legacy arrangements to honor the experience and qualifications of the existing workforce.
What's in it for children and families? Quality and equity. It's like if you go to an RN for healthcare, you can count on the foundational training and expertise that person has, regardless of the setting they work in, geographic location, or the age group they work with. Also, quality isn't limited by what a family can afford. This also offers access and choice. This should impact recruitment and retention, building the size of the workforce and the number of programs. Also, increased public funding will address the issue of affordability.
Thank you for joining us today and watching.
I will make you watch me thank you. I have to tell you a funny story before we move on. So the very first time I played that video in one of these sessions back in March, I totally forgot that they had done a couple clips with me in it, and I was wearing the exact same outfit. And I was just like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. But then I'm noticing today I have on a sweater of a similar color. Apparently, orange is my thing. So let's talk a little bit more about these three designations. And again, remember in the beginning, I asked you to hold those two pieces. We're building a system for the future workforce and also making sure we carefully hold our existing workforce. So when we look at these three designations, early childhood educator 1, 2, and 3, we can see that there's very clear preparation expectations and there's clear roles, responsibilities for them. And if we think about that preparation, you know, I'm sure we've talked to many early childhood educators and maybe even ourselves that have taken a convoluted path to earning education, credentials, or degrees. And a lot of times we might have done something that ended up leading to nothing, and it can be really frustrating. So part of the recommendations in the Unifying Framework is making sure that the path an early childhood educator begins on is clear. And so they're not taking coursework that leads to nothing, that they are building towards that next designation, that they are making gains. And so in these particular roles, there are lead, support, and guide, just as if we think about and connect it to the medical profession. When we enter a hospital, we have that LNA, LPN, and RN.
We know some of those are able to give us an IV. We know some are providing comfort. Some are able to help with medication distributions, but everybody has their own set preparation. They have responsibilities and practices, and they work together as a team. And so just like the vision for the future for early childhood is these 3 designations would work together as a team, supporting each other, ensuring high quality practices within the classroom. The other thing that's really important as we think about the existing workforce is we've heard this over and over again when we've talked to members out in the field, is we need to remember to honor the experience of our existing workforce. We need to help them get across the bridge. This isn't about going to the workforce and saying, you need to go back to college. This is really about getting them across the bridge and saying, you've got 20, 30 years in the field of experience. You've got 500 plus workshop hours. You've got all these standalone college courses, or you've got this credential, whatever it is, and you're important and you matter and you are amazing with children. And we need to value that and honor it and help you across the bridge. The other thing is when we think about that future workforce, I like to tie everything to the nursing field. I just feel like it's a little more relevant. So imagine for a minute, you're in the hospital, you're laying in the bed, you're not feeling that great, and you know you've got to get an IV. So the nurse comes in and she's carrying her little tote bag with her and everything. And she's telling you, she's like, I'm going to, do an IV. I've got my pole, I got my little bag, I got my alcohol swabby and all the jazz I need. You can tell I'm not actually a nurse. So they're getting ready to do it. And she says, it's going to be okay. Just relax. I've got this. Now, when we think about the early childhood field, we all know there's this term called a variance, which means you can have permission to practice for a certain time period while you get your training. So imagine, if you will, you're laying in that hospital bed and the nurse says to you, it's all okay. I'm going to get this IV set because don't worry, I have a variance. They're going to teach me how to do this in about a year. And so that's where we want to move this future workforce towards, as you come in with some of that pre-education. You come in knowing how to engage with children. We need to raise the bar. We need to make sure that we're recognized that these children matter and that our early educators have the skills and tools they need when they come in and they're prepared. So the next piece I want to talk about with you is professional compensation. Now, when we brought this out to the workforce, of course, everybody's clamoring. They want to hear about this. This is a favorite topic. But this isn't about the dollars and cents. This is about the framework of what compensation is. And again, we brought forth this framework and said, this is what's recommended in the Unifying Framework. Does this work for Vermont? Is this something that we can reach consensus on? So I'm going to go ahead and play this. And I think you'll find it really interesting, the different areas that are covered.
Compensation for early childhood educators is a Class 4 road. Early childhood educators are undervalued. Early childhood education is underfunded, and this leads to inequities for educators, children, and families alike. Requirements increase, but compensation stays the same, resulting in a net decrease in compensation over the past 10 years. This harms everyone, but disproportionately affects educators who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Revenues don't meet costs. This is especially challenging for family child care providers who typically run small businesses and pay themselves last. Here in Vermont, where our rural communities rely on family child care programs, insufficient resources have been provided to help these programs adapt to new regulations. So programs are in decline. Talented teachers can stay in the field only by making personal and financial sacrifices, and this limits quality and choice for both families and educators.
I don't want to leave childcare at all. I absolutely love my job. I love my families that I work for. I love the kids that I work for. I'm very passionate about my job, but unfortunately, because the pay is so low, we just can't survive. I'm considered below the poverty level.
None of this is good for children and families, the early childhood education workforce, or the economy. Compensation directly affects the well-being of children and educators, the supply of care, and the quality of early childhood education. Research confirms that educator shortages are driven by lack of compensation, and that better paid teachers provide better quality care. Compensation allows educators to provide for their own families, including the ability to afford programs for their own young children. Compensation improves staff retention and recruitment, morale, workplace cohesion, productivity, and relationships between children and teachers. With fair compensation, the workforce grows and stabilizes. This reinforces this essential infrastructure of our society. Finally, compensation on par with other professions is an investment in the greatest contributor to quality in early childhood education, and that is the workforce. We know it's essential to increase investments in the early childhood education workforce. Haven't we been down this road before? No, we're building a new road, a road designed with the early childhood education workforce. Here's what Power to the Profession has to say. One of the barriers to increased compensation through public investment has always been the lack of an answer to the questions, compensation for whom? For doing what? For the first time, we have cohesive and clear responses to those questions in the Unifying Framework and in the consensus documents from our work to advance as a profession in Vermont. In this workforce-led, consensus-driven work, we are establishing who Vermont's early childhood educators are, what we do, and what we will be accountable for. The Unifying Framework envisions compensation for early childhood educators will be at least comparable to public school salaries and comparable across settings, including an adequate benefits package and increases commensurate with increased preparation and competency. How do we get there? Through our workforce-led and workforce-informed effort, we are discussing the recommendations of the Unifying Framework, coming to consensus for how we might align with those recommendations, and leading conversations with partners in our ecosystem as we design our blueprint for a new road.
Now, when we think about this professional compensation, we often hear over and over again, we can't charge more and we can't make less. Absolutely right. This is not intended to come on the backs of early childhood educators or to increase rates for families. This is really about driving public investment into the early childhood system to make this a sustainable profession with livable wages for the early childhood educators themselves. And we also know that when you are feeling well taken care of and supported, you have benefits such as access to health insurance and dental insurance, things of that nature, you are in a better place mentally and physically to provide that important care to young children. And there's so much research out there that really talks about valuing early childhood educators. We know that they need to have access to benefits to make sure they can take care of themselves so they can take care of others. And again, this piece, this framework, it was really exciting to bring to the workforce and have a conversation around. And there's actually a wage study happening right now that we should have some more information on as we get closer to the end of summer about what the actual recommendations are around those dollars and cents, because that's something we hear over and over again. And one of the pieces in the Unifying Framework is be at least comparable to that of public school teachers. And we know from the feedback we heard out with the workforce is public school teachers have a shorter calendar year and often shorter days. So that's definitely something that's being taken into consideration as those discussions take place. So the next thing I want to talk with you about is professional licensure. But first, before we really talk about that, I want to think about the word license. In Vermont, we use that word a lot of different ways. We have programs that are licensed. We have licensing regulations. Excuse me. So we have family and child care homes, licensed centers. We have the Child Development Division and their licensing department. The other thing we have is we have Vermont's Agency of Education, and they provide educator licenses. So if you are an Act 166 public pre-K partner, you have a Vermont educator or an educator in your program that holds a Vermont license with a specific endorsement to teach young children. But what I'm talking about when I say professional licensure is I'm talking about a license that an early childhood educator would hold to practice. So again, let's zip back over to that nursing profession. And we think about that LNA, LPN, and RN, those 3 different roles. They hold a license to practice. That license comes with accountability. So if there's any types of medical malpractice, they can lose their license to practice. The other type of thing that might help connect this to you is if you think about the legal field. Attorneys hold a license. They're overseen by the Bar Association. The Bar Association is a group of attorneys that are made up to hold other attorneys accountable. If there's any type of unethical practices occurring, an attorney can lose their license to practice. So when we're talking about asking for public investment, many of these things are a give and take. We want to ensure that when we're asking for public investment, we're offering accountability. That accountability piece comes by our early childhood educators holding a license to practice, that they can prove they have mastery and knowledge of the competencies, and that they also are held to specific standards. So why on earth would we want to be licensed? Well, it's an opportunity to be part of a profession, and holding a professional license often comes with respect. When we're out talking to early childhood educators, we hear over and over again that they need compensation, they need livable wages. But the number one thing we hear repeatedly they need is respect. And so a way to move towards respect is definitely a piece such as professional licensure. It also will help support the movement towards professional wages and, of course, those benefits that are needed. It helps provide clarity around the preparation and advancement. Again, you think about, I'm an LNA and I want to go and get some schooling and education so I can move up to be an LPN. There are clear pathways for that. And that's really what the goal of making this profession is about, that folks can advance, that it's reciprocal across state lines. We know right now in Vermont, it can often be very challenging to move here and work as an early childhood educator because our licenses don't always transfer. Pieces, are not as clear and aligned. So that's part of what this moves forward towards. The next thing is it really helps in clarity for families. So we think back to that story I told you about former executive director Sonia Raymond testifying at legislators and saying, this is who we are, this is what we do. Well, having a license really helps clarify that for those policymakers, for the general public. It also, again, as I said, it builds us towards that increased public funding with the accountability piece, helps us unwind some of our confusing regulatory systems, and it's about the profession leading itself. So again, when we think about the legal field, the Bar Association is a group of attorneys leading themselves. And again, I'll reference my colleague, Kim Freeman. If she was here right now, she'd say, we don't want a bunch of people sitting around an oak table, smoking cigars, making decisions. We want the folks that are the end users that understand the system of what's needed day to day to work with children and families to actually have the ability to decide and say, this is what works, this doesn't work. Not somebody in an arbitrary location who hasn't actually done the job before. So where are we at now? What's happening in this project? Well, I'm coming to you and saying, here's a great opportunity for you to be involved. This is a place where you need to use your voice. This is a place where I'm saying you have a seat at the table. Don't give up that seat. Make sure you join us. I've seen so many people that have an opportunity to speak or talk to a legislator who will let that opportunity go by. I encourage you to grab a hold of that, because really and truly, if you don't, then who else is going to? You're the professional. You're the one that can say, I gave up my lunch break so I could learn more about this advancing as a profession work. I went to classes late at night. I missed out on my child's baseball game so I could learn more as an early childhood educator. I did these things because I am that committed to my field. It's really about telling others what you need as an early childhood educator, about making them aware. This is important. These are the foundational years. This is where our kids are getting that early wiring. And he could tell us more about brain development than I ever could. And, about building those pieces that are going to carry us forward, whether it's our social emotional skills, our responses and reactions, things, stimuli, our academics. This is a place to come together and really talk to your neighbors, talk to your colleagues, talk to your coworkers, talk to families in your program. Let them know, what does it mean to be an early childhood educator? The other thing is stay connected. So I'm sure most of you are sitting there with a second device. I know I am. We all have devices all around us now. So an important way you can stay connected to this work is through social media. Vermont AEYC has a Facebook page and Instagram. They put up communication pieces all the time, updates about this project. Same as Let's Grow Kids. If you're not following either of those organizations, I really encourage you, open it up, click the like button. The next thing, make sure you're visiting that Vermont AEYC website. There's so much great information on there. All we did today is what I like to call sprinkling, where we talked about the whole project. Everything is there, from the bios on the task force members to the discussion drafts, to the consensus documents. Excuse me, just quick pause for a drink. There's also blog posts that are there, some great videos and access to information, the links that will take you to that unifying framework document that we've referenced so many times today. Then we have a YouTube channel, and that is where all these amazing videos are stored. Katie Titterton has put together so many videos for us. And I really encourage you to take a look and think about, well, what could I do with one of these videos? Share it at a staff meeting, 5-minute video, 3-minute video, 2-minute video, have a great conversation about it. It helps move the work forward. It helps to talk about things, brings up questions, shares thoughts. When we think about the first piece we studied, that early childhood educator identity, well, we've charged the early childhood educators with using that. Identify yourself as an early childhood educator. One of the easiest things you can do is in your signature line of your email, where you put your name, Jane Smith, right underneath that, put early childhood educator. And over time, society, colleagues, different folks, they'll just begin to acclimate to that term. The other thing you can do is you can put a link there in your signature line to one of these videos. That's an opportunity to, again, share a little bit further about what's happening in this project. And we do a lot of great things happening that we're going to make sure to bring back out to you in the coming months. We're going to talk about the design teams that are actually taking the recommendations that have been made and figuring out, okay, how do we work with these recommendations from the workforce? We have one looking at creating Early Childhood Educator 1. We have another looking at the career ladder, which is now, I believe, going to be segued over to be called Career Pathways. We have the wage study. We have a pilot going on with 100 educators in Vermont looking at what is needed for them as existing members of the workforce to cross that bridge to fit into one of those 3 designations, and also work with higher ed to make sure that when this work stands up, they're ready for that ECE 1, 2, and 3. So as we come to the close of this, I want to remind you that in order to obtain the free membership to NACE and Vermont AEYC, there is a survey to complete. Part of why we think this membership is so important is it connects you to that larger voice. It connects you to the organizations that advocate on your behalf, NACE on a national level, and they have all sorts of great resources on their website, and their membership comes with a lot of different benefits of periodicals, articles, access to different materials that once you log in, you can obtain easier, as well as conferences. Same thing with Vermont AEYC. The membership with them allows you to have access to the conference, again, resources, your voice for different policies and things of that nature. And I like to close out with just this great quote that I found, that being a member means I'm part of a professional community. That's really what we're talking about here, is being a professional in a profession. I have a voice, and that voice is critical in decision making, and it impacts 2 million early childhood educators. Can you imagine that? 2 million early childhood educators across the nation. That's where we want your voice to be. That's where we want you to have that seat at the table and make sure that you're continuing to engage with folks, that you're saying, hey, this is what I think. This works for me. This doesn't work for me. I agree with this. I don't agree with that. So I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the survey in chat. So what you'll do is you'll double click on that. It'll bring up a separate window on your computer. The survey will take you about 4 to 5 minutes to complete. And again, that is what triggers the membership. So a couple things for you to know about how the membership works. So you'll receive an email from NACE sending you a gift certificate to purchase the membership. Now, this gift certificate can be used in a few different ways. If you don't have a membership right now, great, you can absolutely take one right now today. If you have an existing membership and you'd like to use it for renewal, you can absolutely do that. The membership or the gift certificate is valid for 60 days. If your membership expires after that 60 days, then there's a phone number you can call and just ask for an extension. The other thing is you'll see there's a variety of memberships available. Some of those come with books and magazines, things of that nature. So you can take this membership and apply it towards that if you'd like to get one of the higher level memberships. So I want to thank everyone today for coming and joining, encouraging you to finish that survey, stay in touch with us, follow the project. The other thing I want to make sure to say is thank you to Vermont AEYC and to Let's Grow Kids for making this presentation possible and this work and the project possible to continue to study and move forward as we work to fully advance as a recognized profession.